Hi, I'm Meg Stout, author of Reluctant Polygamist. As a reminder, this chapter is inspired by Jared Diamond's 1988 award-winning book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. In Joseph's time, medicine was based on barbaric ignorance, and there were beliefs that persuaded men and women to be circumspect, even within marriage. Hypotheses about what happened in Nauvoo during the 1840s must take these realities into consideration. With that, here is the second part of Chapter 3, Germs. There are many theories about sexual activity in Nauvoo in the 1840s. For example, someone emailed me regarding a 19th century woman who was reportedly raped and is believed by some to have never had children. My correspondent postulated the woman had realized she was infected with a venereal disease, then selflessly decided to avoid sexual relations for the rest of her life to spare a future husband any risk of infection. The problem with this theory is that it presumes a modern understanding of disease and a modern ability to diagnose disease and its consequences. The concept of bacteria was not known in 1844 and would not be known until Lister's experiments with Penicillium glaucum in 1871. Even then, it would take well over a decade before doctors accepted Lister's theories regarding bacteria. The term infection was used in 1844 to refer to illness caused by bad air. It was not understood how illness affected the air, but serious concern regarding infection was associated with superstition. This is demonstrated in Jane Austen's book Sense and Sensibility, in the scene where Marianne Dashwood becomes ill. When the doctor mentions infection, the reasonable characters dismiss the possibility of risk to the infant in the home. These reasonable characters were the doctor, Eleanor Dashwood, Colonel Brandon, and Mr. Palmer. Only Mrs. Jennings and Charlotte Palmer, the ridiculous characters, were concerned. It was believed placing aromatic herbs near the nose could prevent illness. Children would be sent out with pungent bags of asafoetida around their necks to ward off colds and influenza. These asphetti or asafoetida bags were being recommended as late as 1918 to combat the Spanish influenza. However, the National Institutes of Health webpage on asafoetida dismisses the medical benefit of wearing the pungent spice, stating, whatever effectiveness it had was probably due to the antisocial properties of the amulet rather than any medicinal value. Florence Nightingale, the famed nurse of the Crimean War during the 1850s, rejected germ theory. Nightingale did not believe that disease could be spread by physical contact, referred to as contagion. Instead, she advocated patients be kept warm and clean in well-ventilated facilities. Hypotheses about the 1840s must account for both the reality of bacterial infection and the public's ignorance regarding bacteria. Since few children were produced by known covenant relationships prior to Joseph's death, it is sometimes asserted that the unusually low number of children associated with the many presumed liaisons was due to surgical removal of the unborn infants. In the 1880s, Sarah Bates Pratt had given up any pretense of believing in the church restored by Joseph Smith. Sarah gave an interview to Wilhelm Weil for his 1886 expose, Mormon Portraits. Sarah claimed to have seen Dr. Bennett with a long metal implement used to perform abortions, explaining he had just performed such an abortion on one of Joseph's wives. By implication, other pregnancies were also surgically terminated, explaining the lack of offspring from the presumed liaisons. However, doctors in the 1840s would not have sterilized their instruments. Surgical termination of pregnancies should have resulted in statistically significant rates of maternal death. Widespread non-exclusive sexuality should have also resulted in evidence of venereal disease among the women who covenanted with Joseph Smith, even if venereal infection was not understood at the time. Ironically, beliefs in the 1840s regarding the causes of illness would have discouraged unnecessary intimacy even within marriage. Cholera, in particular, was believed to be associated with intemperate sexuality, including unnecessary sex in marriage. Cholera first appeared in India in 1817. By 1832, cholera epidemics broke out in New York and London. The linkage between cholera and the environment would not be discovered until 1849, when Dr. John Snow was able to use statistics to construct a theory linking the spread of cholera to contaminated water. The existence of the microorganisms causing cholera would not be confirmed until bacteriologist Robert Koch observed them in an advanced microscope in 1883. Lacking a medical context for the scourge of cholera, leaders in both London and New York attributed the disease, quote, to poor morality because outbreaks clustered within the poverty-stricken sectors of the city. Specifically, Irish immigrants were regarded as second class. Their vice was considered a contributing factor to their high mortality rates. Americans saw neither poverty nor wealth as accidental conditions. The affluent classes viewed success as testimony of their virtuous habits and poverty as a product of vice, idleness, intemperance, and immorality, close quote. A survey of medical professionals in 1833 found that only one physician of more than 100 surveyed thought that cholera was a contagious disease. Most believed the disease was caused by promiscuity and excessive sexuality within legitimate marriages. If a respectable individual contracted the disease, gossip confirmed he harbored a clandestine vice. Fear of cholera persuaded many to embrace formal religion and refrain from excess sexuality. There is a wonderful biography on Andrew Garfield that focuses on his death. Andrew Garfield was shot, ironically, by a fellow who was unhappy because he had expected to be appointed as ambassador to some country. And I don't know why he thought shooting the President of the United States would make things better for him. When Garfield was shot, there was a doctor with him of the name of Bliss. He was one of those who had not accepted the idea that bacteria existed. And so he poked his finger, unwashed, into Garfield's back, hoping to dig out the ball, or I guess it would have been a more typical bullet at that point. So he stuck his finger into the back in the direction he believed the ball had traveled. And when he couldn't fish it out, put President Garfield under his care. President Garfield lingered for months as he declined. Ironically, if he'd just been shot and nobody had touched him, he probably would have survived. When he died, they performed an autopsy, and they found that what had killed him was consequences of the infection. They could clearly see where Bliss had stuck his finger and the infection that had spread from there. The bullet was on the other side of the body. It's a fascinating book. Alexander Bell invented a device, a metal detector. Dr. Bliss was so certain that the bullet had gone in the direction he had poked his finger that he did not allow Alexander Bell to scan the other side of President Garfield's body, which finding the bullet wouldn't have saved President Garfield, but it just astounds me, the arrogance to not even let Alexander Graham Bell scan the president's entire body. It was the love of the American people for President Garfield that violently switched public opinion regarding germs. in the aftermath of President Garfield's death, obviously from tangible bacterial infection, we start seeing things like women breaking down iron beds in their entirety and dipping every single piece in kerosene, which was also useful to get rid of bed bugs, but they saw it as a remedy against germs. So many things about our past that seem so ridiculous to us today make so much sense when you actually understand what they were going through. Have a great day.